Commanders should move up with an unprecedented haul to try to grab Caleb Williams away from the Chicago Bears.
Want something unprecedented? Would you suggest them doing something unprecedented to go get Caleb Williams just up one spot, 2-1?
I don't know that I would say unprecedented. I think if you can get something done that's that's within reason, I can make a case for that. I like the other two quarterbacks. I mean, I think there's three good quarterbacks in this draft that I think are really highly graded. And I also think when you look at Washington and you look at Adam Peters coming over there, you always carry your scars with you. And maybe the one do-over that he might have with John Lynch there is the massive haul to go up to get Trey Lance that didn't pan out. So does he carry that with him? They're sitting there with the second pick. And let's say on a grading scale, you might have a 69 or a 7.0 grade on Caleb Williams, and he's the top guy. But then you've got 67 grades on the next two guys. Like, okay, yeah, he's a little bit better, but man, this is still a really, really good option for me, and I'm not going to have to part with all the picks.
Look, I'm sure Adam Peters has run all the numbers. He's looked at the trade value charts, and if you're Peters, you go to Chicago and say, look, we like Caleb Williams. We'd love to move up, but this is the package we're willing to part with. And if you're not willing to do this deal, then we'll move on to plan B or C, whatever that might be. Mm-hmm. Like, Peters has been around long enough and been in good enough organizations where I don't think he's going to get fleeced by the Bears to move up one spot. Now, if it's a reasonable ask, I think, especially if Kingsbury stumps for Caleb Williams, and we know Spielman loves him, we know he's in that room too, like, if it makes sense, I think that they would do it. But if they're just getting, bent over and taken advantage of, I don't see that happening.
I think it's going to be hard-pressed to do something that would be deemed reasonable to move up because I think other teams are going to try and trade up for the number one pick, and they might trade up for the number two pick. I was telling you about this Pro Football Focus mock draft. They put out their first mock, and they got Caleb Williams going number one. And at number two, they have the Commanders trading the first-round pick for Denver's number one, which is 12th. Mm-hmm. So Denver's going to be a team that could move up, depending on what happens with Russell Wilson. And then Washington would also get a first-round pick next year and the year after. And then with the 12th pick, they would draft J.J. McCarthy. Cakes gave it a big thumbs down.
No, I'm sorry. I can't.
For that.
Well, I mean,
but there's going to be a lot of teams. My point bringing that one up is I think there are going to be a lot of teams that are going to be looking at trading up to number one. Now, the Bears could ultimately decide, hey, we're going to stay with the number one pick, draft Caleb Williams, trade away Justin Fields for a second-round pick or whatever they can get for Justin Fields. But I think it would be hard for Washington to move up to number one without giving up a huge haul.
Of course.
Because they'll be able to get a huge haul from other teams like they did last year.
Right, but because the Bears know that there's multiple teams that want to get to number one.
Right.
So they're not going to just get off scot-free. They're going to have to give up a boatload just to move one spot. And I don't know if Commanders fans would like that because of all the holes in the roster. I think you got to keep all those picks.
And if I'm Washington,
especially in Dan Quinn's first year.
Yeah. If I'm Washington too, if Daniel Jeremiah is right. Now he was kind of throwing it out hypothetically. But if he's right that Drake May, Jaden Daniels, and Caleb Williams are all graded pretty similarly, well, then I'm definitely not moving up. Now, if there's a huge gap, and some say there is a gap, like Louis Riddick says there's a gap between Caleb Williams and his number two is Jaden Daniels. And he's pretty passionate about Jaden Daniels, and I've seen some other things. Doug Farrar put out some good stuff this week where he got into each of the players' strengths and weaknesses. And he seems to like Jaden Daniels. He might even be his number one over Caleb Williams and Drake May. But if Daniel Jeremiah is correct and they're all grading pretty similar, well, then stand pat and take whoever you have rated highest on the board next.
Yeah, I mean, who knows what they're thinking in terms of those three quarterbacks. But, I mean, if they do have Drake May slightly below Caleb, then you can work with that. You can work with Drake May.
Think.
If you have Jaden Daniels slightly below Caleb Williams, you can work with that.
But I would need to be, if I'm Peters, I would need to be blown away to move off the number two pick.
Yeah.
Just because, I mean, he knows how long it's been since they've had a game changer franchise quarterback here in Washington. Who knows when they're going to pick number 2 again? Like, if things go according to plan, you're never picking this high as long as you're with this organization ever again.
Right.
Like, it shouldn't happen.
EB's in on Jaden Daniels. Here's what Louis Riddick says about Jaden Daniels. He says the data and the tape both showing that Jaden Daniels, the best quarterback in college football in 23, and against the best competition teams is when he was his best compared to all other QBs. What determines where he goes in the draft, how high he's selected, will not be because of what he did on the field, because he was lights TF out between the white lines.
Mm-hmm.
That's Jaden Daniels.
Yep.
And then you can get
What's he say about Caleb?
really high praise about Drake May. Doug Farrar, who's a writer, he gave his in-depth pluses and minuses on some of the quarterbacks. And here's what he says about Drake May. Pocket movement is very underrated. He doesn't automatically run under pressure. Arm talent and arm strength, a plus. Tight window throws are no problem at all, and can make accurate off-platform throws as well as anybody. Now, he does have minuses. Not an anticipation thrower, arm arrogance. And at the end, he goes, carnival ride quarterback who could take his NFL team to a Super Bowl or get his OC fired.
Yeah, that's quite a range there for Drake May.
But who knows?
They just got to get it right.
They got to get it right.
I mean, my personal opinion right now, I wouldn't be able to distinguish anything amongst the quarterbacks. I don't watch enough college football to even really have an opinion, but is that they should stay with the number 2 pick and draft a quarterback, whoever they believe is the best quarterback left at number 2.
Well, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. So
that's going to happen. I don't see them trading out of the number 2 pick. But you're going to see all kinds of different opinions from everybody out there. There's going to be a billion different mock drafts coming out before late April.
But it's not always like that. Like a lot of years, I think Joe Burrow was pretty much a consensus number 1.
Sure.
I think Trevor Lawrence was a consensus number 1.
I know, but Caleb Williams is kind of the consensus number 1.
Yes and no, man.
I mean, there are a couple guys that you're pointing out that like Daniels over him, but if you look at most mock drafts, it's Williams.
Yeah, most mock drafts.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you got Merrill Hodge taking shots at Caleb Williams. You have Tim Hasselbeck saying that Drake May is the best.
Yep.
I don't think it's as universal as it usually is.
Well, ultimately, it doesn't really matter. It matters what Ryan Poles, who runs the Bears, thinks about Caleb Williams.
Yeah. And
if
it
he
matters
loves him and thinks he's, the next Patrick Mahomes, he's going to pick him at number 1, or he's gonna sell that pick for a huge ransom for whoever wants to come up and pay that price.
Does anybody want them to trade
if you're
up to
going to trade a pick, okay, if you trade number 2 out, whatever. So you obviously don't like May or Daniels as much. But if you stay at 2, it's important, obviously, to get the right guy that you think fits best for what you want to do. And then you got to coach them up. I know you think coaching staffs are overrated, but you got to coach them up.
I think it's part of it.
Once you get in here, you got to coach them up. You got to put a bunch of good players around them. You got to put a good offensive line in front of him, especially if he's going to play. We assume he would start week 1 next year if he's drafted that high. So that's also very important that you coach his ass up if you draft him there.
Phone number is 800-636-1067. So we're talking about this Daniel Jeremiah deal. Do you think the Commanders should trade up to 1 so they get whoever they want, even if it takes a big haul? I personally do not. I would stay at number 2.
I wouldn't.
Does anybody want them to trade up to 1?
I'm sure there are some people out there.
Would you want them to trade up to 1?
Probably not. And I think there might be a little something to what Jeremiah is saying about there being some scar tissue there with Peters being part of the Trey Lance deal. Now, he's obviously a smart, analytical guy, and he looks at this as an independent event. What Trey Lance did or didn't do has nothing to do what happened here.
Right, it shouldn't cloud your judgment.
It shouldn't, but probably in his subconscious, he's thinking, the last time I made a move up for a quarterback didn't really work out. So that could be a little something in the back of his brain that could influence his actions. I'm not saying it is, but there's a possibility that that's there.
And the thing about the Trey Lance deal, and I don't know that we'll ever know, is, look, he was the assistant GM.
Right.
Like, he could have been against the Trey Lance deal, but John Lynch was for it or Kyle Shanahan was for it. We don't know how that all operated.
He could have been the
He's
flag
running the
waiver.
show now. Like, this is the track record that matters.
Yeah, this is a big
I know
one.
that Jason brought up
This is a big
that Adam
draft.
Peters got a lot of credit for kind of unearthing gems in late rounds like George Kittle.
That's the rumor.
It's like, but this is the one where we're going to pay attention. Like, forget about the past. He got the gig. So what is he going to do? And what clues? Like right now, what are the clues? The only clue I think we have right now, and it's not even from Adam Peters, is just that Kingsbury said that Caleb Williams and Patrick Mahomes are eerily similar.
Right.
So that would make you think that they would want to go after Caleb Williams because the offensive coordinator who they hired, who worked with Caleb Williams, thinks that he can be Patrick Mahomes.
Mm-hmm.
That's really the only clue. I don't think we've got any other clues on whether they like Drake May, Jaden Daniels, or Caleb Williams. There haven't been any leaks. Now it's still early in the process. We haven't got to the combine or pro days yet.
All right, let's hit a couple calls. Do you think that the Commanders should go all in and trade up to 1? That would be just a huge story. Huge.
What if they traded up to 1 and took Drake May?
No, well, that would be. I don't think that's going to happen. Let's go to Mike in Haymarket. Mike, you're on with the Junks. Good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen. How are you?
Hello.
All right. So, first of all, I don't think the Commanders should even think about trading up. There's too much holes everywhere. I think, as Bish said, all over the place for the most part. And it's to trade up, you're basically mortgaging everything to build around this quarterback that is supposedly going to be there. So I also don't like the idea of taking any of these quarterbacks. But again, that's if you can trade back and get maybe a second tier one if you're really sold on somebody. I think it's a viable option to pick up extra picks and then go get a Bo Nix, possibly. But I don't even like Penix. I don't like Penix. I don't like McCarthy either. So,
are you a Howler?
If you're really,
So you must like Sam Howell.
I like him, and you have to remember. Okay, this is a big point. You have to remember that when Sam Howell had his best year at North Carolina, he was touted as being the number 1 overall pick for a pre-mock draft for the next season. And I'm not saying that somebody can't go from top to bottom, but you also have to realize how much he lost after that season that he had. He lost 2 offensive guards that went to the NFL. He lost 2 running backs that went to the NFL, and his main wide receiver was Diami Brown, who went to Washington.
Yeah, but Mike,
don't you think all 32 teams knew that passed him over for 4 rounds?
They're not running it back with Sam Howell. He may be on the roster. He may even start a few games if whoever they draft isn't ready. But they're moving on from Sam Howell as the starter.
But just think about this. And Mike's right. There were a lot of mock drafts. And by the way, these were mock drafts.
Mocks, yes.
All right. Doesn't mean Sam Howell would have been the number 1 pick overall.
Right.
But just think if he was a first-round pick after that year, based on what he did in the NFL, how much of a disappointment he'd be looked at. Now, again, he would have a longer leash, but people would be saying, oh, my God, that's a bust in the first round. So, and by the way, you just got to make your team better.
Right.
College kids lose players all the time. They do. You got to make your team better, and he just got slightly worse, and he's not going to be the starting quarterback for the future for this team.
What's up, guys? So you guys know a Hal guy, but, all the talk about the Bears and they want this mother load for the number 1. If they don't get it and they just pick Williams, that's going to make that number 2 pick even that more needed for all these teams need quarterbacks.
Absolutely.
You don't think it's worth it? You don't think it's worth it to trade it at that point and then get somebody a little later and then have him and Hal fight it out in training camp?
No,
and that way you got a little security?
But Mikey, you're a Hal guy.
If you get somebody much more talented than Howell,
you're a Hal guy.
That's the goal.
But I'm saying we can still get a quarterback, but just not the top 3 or 5. If we do something with Denver or something like that, we can still get a decent quarterback to have them fight it out. So we got a little more security that one of them with a good line and a new coaching staff can make it happen.
Yeah, but here's the problem, Mike. Here's the problem. If you trade out of that 2 and you get a somewhat decent quarterback, like you're defining it, okay, and he's not good enough to beat out Howell, then you've got Sam Howell as your starting quarterback next year.
It's a problem.
And are you okay with that?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you that Adam Peters isn't.
Yeah, you're okay with spinning your wheels because that's what it sounds like.
I'm telling you, Adam.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate the call.
Adam Peters and Dan Quinn are not going to be happy with it.
if you're Adam Peters, your mindset can't be, well, let's find a guy who's around the same skill level as Sam Howell, and they can battle it out in training camp. We'll pick the best guy from that group. No, that can't be the mindset. Mindset has to be, let's find somebody who's light years better than Sam Howell. And we have the opportunity to do that at number 2.
Correct.
That they didn't have when they picked Sam Howell in the 5th round.
Correct.
Not 5th overall, in the 5th round.
I understand that, there are people out there who think Howell behind a good line will be really good. Well, so will the number 2 pick in the draft behind a good line.
That's
because
correct.
he's better than what Howell was in college.
Yes.
He did bring up, though, a good point that if Caleb goes 1, there will be a bunch of teams, we're assuming, that will try and get to that number 2 spot to draft Jaden or Drake May. So Cakes wasn't for the trading down to number 12, taking J.J. McCarthy with 2 first-round picks. Mm-hmm. What would entice you?
If I'm Peters, I probably feel like...
Is there any quarterback beyond the top 3
no,
that should be
that's
okay?
What I was
so you got to have a top 3 guy.
I need to have one of the consensus top 3 guys on my board.
Okay.
I can't start off my campaign as Adam Peters with Penix or Bo Nix or J.J. McCarthy. I just those can't be my guys.
Yeah, and we don't know how they're graded amongst the Commanders' coaching staff and the scouts. We have no idea. But just based on everything we saw and everything we're reading, those are the top 3 quarterbacks.
Right.
And they could go 1, 2, 3, or maybe someone trades up or trades out. Who knows? But the thing about getting back to Howell is, if you traded out of the 2 and you went down to the 10, 12, 14 pick, whatever.
Right.
And you drafted Bo Nix. And look, Bo Nix and J.J. McCarthy might end up being better college or pro quarterbacks than these top 3. Who knows?
Could happen.
We just have no idea. But just based on your grades, if you did that and then you were right and McCarthy wasn't better than Howell, you can't go into next year and play Sam Howell for 17 games.
No, absolutely not.
The odds of Daniels, May, and Caleb being the best quarterbacks 1, 2, 3 in this draft.
It's very small.
Infinitesimal. Like the other guys are going to have a shot too, and don't forget about Penix.
That's what I just said.
Mean,
of course,
they're all going to have a shot, and it's it is really hard, but you still want to take the shot at hopefully hitting a home run.
I want to take a bite.
You are correct that those guys 1, 2, and 3 probably based on history won't be as good as 1, 2, 3 should be.
Right,
but if you think that and you trade out, you take Penix and you take Bo Nix or McCarthy, and they can't start, they're not good enough to start, you are screwed.
I want to take a bite from the best apple. When I walk into a grocery store or a farmer's market, I'm not going to go to the secondary apple stand. I'm going to go to the freshest apple stand I can find. And that's picking from the top 3.
But you truly never – Jaden Daniels wasn't a top 3 pick 6 months ago.
Nope.
Neither was Joe Burrow before he burst on the scene for LSU either.
Sometimes these guys move up, like Baker. Baker moved way up to number 1 and then proved not to be the guy.
Right.
It's a crapshoot.
You
100%.
can pick all the Bo Nixes and McCarthys you want. I'm going to pick a stud. And that's what I'm going to do as my first move.
Usually I'm with you, but I'm staking I'm a Penix guy. I've told you guys this is my guy through and through. I believe he's the best quarterback in the draft. I'm on an island. I wouldn't do that number 1 probably, but I think time will tell.
All right, let's go to Franco in D.C.
The championship
Franco.
game didn't scare you, Drab?
Did you see the Texas game? He played 7 ranked teams and beat 6 of them and was lights out in 6 of those games.
Okay.
Everybody's
Franco,
a lot of bad games.
You're on with the Junks. Good morning. Franco, that's you, my friend. That's your last chance. All right, let's go to Matt. He is calling in from Calvert. What's up, Matt?
Hey, how's it going, guys?
What's up?
I am not saying I do not think Sam Howell is the answer by any means, but I think the offensive line is our biggest area that needs to be addressed. We've gone through 20-plus quarterbacks in the last 20 years. We've had the 31st ranked offensive line last season. I think that needs to be addressed before we go all in on a QB, is my point.
So you want to trade out and draft a lineman in the first round?
I'd say trade back. Try to get some kind of package, either somebody mediocre, not saying mediocre quarterback wise, but to get some kind of package this year. Maybe grab Joe Walt in the top 7, 8, and then start building that line up and bring somebody in next year. I I don't think anybody this year is that guy. I don't think he's the franchise-changing quarterback. I definitely don't think it's Caleb. I think Jaden Daniels is the best quarterback in this draft, but I think the offensive line is where we need to start personally.
Well, you can still
I'm going to
address.
have to agree to disagree,
You
my
can
friend.
still address the offensive line.
Yeah, there are multiple ways to upgrade your offensive line.
You don't necessarily have to draft the offensive line at 2 or at 8 if you trade back. You can address it in other ways. But to say we can just wait until next year, you can't do that because you don't have an idea of who's going to be available next year. I mean, if you really think Quinn Ewers is the guy, well, doesn't mean you're going to get him. You don't know where you're going to be drafting.
Look, of course, I don't want Josh Harris making the pick.
They're not
That's
doing
why
that.
he brought in Adam Peters to run the personnel department. But I have to think there's some sort of implicit pressure upon Peters to pick a quarterback with the first pick. Right? I mean,
Yeah,
I would think so.
There has to be some of that coming from Harris and the rest of the ownership group.
And Jason brings up a good point about yours. Not specifically him, but I read that most of the scouts believe next year's draft for quarterbacks isn't nearly what it is this year.
Right.
So there's more importance on taking advantage of a good quarterback class this year because you're not going to have as many good prospects next season.
Correct.
According to these scouts.
And most likely you won't be picking at number 2 again next season.
But you don't even know where you're going to be drafting is my point. I mean.
Right. Like you have certainty right now. You have the number 2 overall pick in the draft. Unless you get just a crazy deal that Peters looks at and goes to his staff and says, look, I really want to pick this guy at number 2, but I don't know, the Raiders want to come up to number 2 and I can't pass up this deal. Like, unless he gets blown away by another team, I don't see him moving off the number 2 pick. Like, it has to be an amazing deal.
I don't think he will. There's a lot of pressure to go out and get that.
And also, if I'm Peters, I'm going to call Ryan Poles, the GM of the Bears, and say, I'm going to give you a first-rounder and maybe a second and a third in the future. I'm not giving you multiple first-round picks to move up one spot. If you can find a sucker later down the board that's going to come up, somebody that's
I
at
don't
10
think
or 12,
that's not going to get it done anyway. I don't think.
Okay, then I don't have to waste any more energy calling Chicago area code and trying to do a deal.
I mean, who knows? Maybe Ryan Poles loves Drake May or Daniels. Who knows?
Don't know. Don't know who he loves.
But I don't think that's. I think they're going to stay at 1.
Do you guys? Does it mean anything to you guys that Drake May is only 21 years old, and Jaden Daniels is going to be 24?
He's older. Well, Daniels played
that's
a lot.
Big difference.
He played a lot more college football.
I don't have a problem picking a more mature quarterback.
No, I'm talking about picking the younger guy because he has still so much more room for growth.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that like May because of his youth. And I mean, the biggest knock on Penix is that he's going to be 24 right after the draft.
Yeah, they don't want the
I think
older
that's
quarterbacks.
overblown.
24.
Like, I don't think that's that big of a deal.
I mean, he's still going to go high. He's still going to go probably top 3, even if he's 24.
All right, let's go to PJ in wrestling.
But I see what you're saying. I just like the size.
PJ, you're on with the Junks.
Hey, guys. Lovely day to everybody. So I agree with you guys that I don't want to go the route of, like, drop it down to 12, getting a Bo Nix or McCarthy, this and that. I want us to actually stay at 2. Now, the only thing I would offer the Bears for number 1 is kind of from a high leverage point, right? I would not offer them draft capital. What I would do is this. I would float the idea of saying, hey, we'll give you our 2 pick and your pick of either, Jonathan Allen or Deron Payne. They may not take that. If they don't, okay, stay at 2. I would also even hit up New England at number 3. Let's say we have these 3 guys rated around the same, Caleb, Drake, and Jaden, right? Mm-hmm. But let's say New England is Goo Goo Gaga over one of them. I would even consider moving back 1 slot to number 3 if New England thinks highly enough of one of those 2 guys that are going to be left there after Caleb and maybe picking up an extra second or third. But, yeah, I don't like the idea of taking, no disrespect to Bo Nix, Michael Penix, or, J.J. McCarthy. But, I want to take either one of the top 3, or if we're going to do that, trade down and just stick with Sam Howell, which I like Sam Howell, but I'd rather get one of these top 3. So that's what I would kind of go about it, how I would go about
Thanks,
it, guys.
PJ. Appreciate the call.